We are in chapter 51. We're ending 51 of the Tanya. So if you got your copy of this book, or if you want the text, feel free to email Maya at temple-israel.org, and we'd love to have you join us in any capacity. What we're looking at is we are in the final stretch of this whole text, and at the beginning of this half of the section of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talked about this figure called the Anuka. The Anuka, who was this young person, this boy that was born with total spiritual vision, total knowledge of Torah and Kabbalah. And the Anuka in the Zohar starts saying all these things. One of the things the Anuka said was that when we say that a human being is the lamp of God, this is what we mean. As the lamp of God, my body is the wick. My body's the wick. The flame of the lamp, that is the Shechinah, God's presence above my head, so to speak. And the oil that is in the lamp, that is causing the Shechinah to rest on the wick and cling to the wick, that is Torah and mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs. And the Alter Rebbe is now returning because elsewhere in the Torah, Chokhmah is often described, oil is described as Chokhmah, as intellect, not as Torah and mitzvahs. So the Alter Rebbe feels the need to revisit this, and we're going to go much deeper into the image, and that's going to finish the Tanya for us. So to start, we've looked at the model of how the soul enters the body, because, as we said, we are a picture of God, maybe a distorted picture, a faulty picture, but we are a picture, and it's the best way to understand God is to look inside at that picture. And in that picture, we can see how God flows into and fills the universe, because our soul flowing the body is a model for God flowing into the universe. Now, what we described is the soul doesn't flow directly into every part of my body in terms of the powers of my body. The soul flows first into the brain, and from there, the whole packet of powers now radiates like the sun shining into a room and then shining into other rooms. It radiates from the brain to the other parts of the body. That's how the powers of the soul enter the body. However, the essence of the soul, that relates to the whole body the same way. The essence of the soul, you can't find anywhere with a microscope, you can't see it anywhere, and my hand is just as alive as my heart or my brain. So the essence of the soul is everywhere, the same, and also hidden everywhere. And the gilui, the revelation of the soul, that enters the brain first, and from there goes to the other parts of the body. Now we're going to go into, we'll finish up this chapter, and we'll go into now the nimshal, which is the model that the metaphor is based on, God flowing into the universe. And we'll see how God's essence is equally hidden everywhere and yet is everywhere. But the package of powers that flows into the universe, which we call the Shechinah, and there's many more names, that is more manifest at higher or lower levels and is manifest differently with different creations. But what's that third piece? What's the brain that the soul flows into? What is that in terms of God? That we'll get to next chapter. So we're top of 802, sorry, bottom of 802, top of 803, right? Yeah. Oh, top of 802. Shehi tchunat uvchinat hamshacha hapratit asher ein sof baruch hu mamshich umeir lo. So Dan, why don't you start nice and loud?
Which is the nature and form of the particular flow with which the blessed Ein Sof imbues and illumines it.
Paul, you heard that okay? Is that coming through online? Yeah? Can you give me a nod if you heard that? Yeah, good. Right. So this is talking about the light, the revelation, the gilui that comes out of God's essence and now becomes manifest in the world. And that does have different aspects and levels. And the light that creates a mountain is actually relating to the mountain. It's creating something that doesn't move, that is big, that has a top and a bottom, that things can grow on. Whatever qualities a mountain has minerals in it. That's different than the light that's creating a bird, which can fly, move around, has self-evident life, right? It's a different category, which is different than what's creating the ocean, which is different than what's creating a thumbtack, whatever. So that kind of light relates to what is being created and actually gives it its nature and its form and illumines it with something that relates to it. Much like that gilui, that manifestation, will create a small finger with energy that a small finger needs. But
the lower worlds and creatures, even the spiritual ones, do not receive the divine life force in quite such a revealed form as it is received in the higher worlds.
Right, so we're talking about the difference between higher worlds and lower worlds. And for someone that may have just joined us, these are not different timelines, so to speak. These are just higher energy precursors to the physical world and the spiritual worlds above it. So there's categories of spiritual worlds going up, up, up. The higher a spiritual world is, that means there's more of this manifest light revealed. The lower a spiritual world, it means more of that light is hidden until you get to the physical world where all that light is hidden. All that light is hidden here. You look at the physical world, you only see physical. It's not apparent that it's being created by something energetic above it. Rak bilvushim rabim asher ein sof baruch hu malbish bahem hachayut v'haor asher mamshich meir lehem lahachayotam. Go ahead, Linda.
But only by means of many garments wherein the blessed Ein Sof invests the vitality and light which he causes to flow and shine on them in order to animate them.
So there are something called garments. And the more garments I put on, the less you can see me, right? If I want to be hidden, I'll put on a mask and I'll put on, and I could even put on big clothes so you can't even see the shape of my body. I might put on so many things that I look like not even human, like it's possible. So the more garments this light puts on, the less you can see the light, the more it's blocked. And only just a little impression gets through, and then that's blocked again, an impression of that gets through, until this infinite blinding light can become something that we can just pick up and say it looks even like physical stuff. These garments
wherein the blessed Ein Sof invests and conceals the light and vitality are so strong and powerful.
Right, you can imagine there's an infinite light. Nothing actually exists. There's only God. Nothing's changed. And yet God sends this light out that's so powerful that it should nullify everything. And now God puts these garments in front of it that allow seemingly other beings to exist until finally, as the Alter Rebbe says, we'll get to this physical world where it looks like God doesn't even exist. You can live in this world and say, there's just physical. I don't see any God. I don't sense any God. That's how powerful these garments are. They've taken an infinite light that doesn't allow anything else to exist and blocked it to the point where it seems like the infinite light itself doesn't exist. Thoughts on that?
And thereby, with this life force and light, he created this world that is really corporal and physical. It creates and animates it by vitality and light, which he draws down and shines forth unto it.
So on the one hand, this physical world looks like there's no light here, no spiritual light. On the other hand, it's being animated by that very light that seems to be absent, right? So that's a powerful, powerful veil, a powerful garment that is blocking the light, and yet that's our source. Or hamlubash umechuseh umustar betoch halvushim harabim v'hatzumim v'hama'alimim umastirim ha'or v'chayut. Paul, why don't you unmute and you can read for me? Thanks. No, you're still mute. There you go.
I'm not sure if I'm in the right spot. That thereby with this life force and light, he created this world that is verily corporeal and physical.
And go down to the bottom of the page. You can go on.
And God creates and animates it by the vitality and light which he draws down and shines forth unto it. Want the next one?
Yes, please.
This illumination is a light that is clothed hidden and concealed within the numerous and powerful garments.
Which hide and conceal the light and vitality. And it's interesting to note, it's a miracle that the world is coming out of nothingness. It's a miracle that the world exists because God is constantly creating something out of nothing to make the world. That's what that light is doing. That light is able to create something out of nothing. And that, if you think about it, is one of the most intense kinds of miracles. Even though we look at the world and we're so used to it, we think, oh, I wake up, it's here just like yesterday. It's a continuous miracle to make something out of nothing that is beyond most of the miracles we see in the Torah. Like if you look at, for instance, the miracles of leaving Egypt, right? Leaving Egypt. So the Alter Rebbe describes, the Kabbalah describes, the biggest of those miracles was actually the parting of the sea. Why? Because it had to last the whole night. God had to change the nature of water continuously as we journeyed through. Otherwise, it would just revert to its normal form. The miracle of frogs, how long did the miracle take? No?
I thought each day was 1 week.
I know it lasted a week, but once you have a frog, it's not a miracle for the frog to remain a frog. The nature of a frog is a frog. So the amount of time it took for God to perform the miracle of frogs was just in a flash, right? The frogs appeared. That was the miracle. Once the frogs are there, it's not a miracle that a frog stays there, right? So the miracle of the frogs was just creating frogs, and then the frogs are there. The miracle of parting the sea, that had to keep the nature of water different. It had to stand instead of flow down all for the entire time we were crossing, right? Same thing here. If you look at the miracle of creating the world, something out of nothing, that needs continuous miraculous action. God's will has to be constantly doing it all the time. So it's one of the most remarkable miracles that's happening all the time, that the whole world is coming from nothing to something. And even though for us it seems normal, that beats the miracle of blood, right? So boom, all the water is now blood, done. Blood doesn't normally do anything other than just stay there and be blood, right? It was, once the water was blood, the miracle was done. So when we look at this, we have to realize the creation of the world from nothing to something is the most remarkable thing that should be blowing our minds all the time, because nothing does not naturally become something. Go ahead, Dan, again.
Yet they contain light and vitality, which constantly creates them ex nihilo, so that they shall not revert to nothing and not as they have been prior to their creation.
Right, so they seem like they have no light, yet they do contain this light, otherwise they revert back to nothing. And by the way, when we say revert back to nothing, we don't mean, this computer case existed for whatever, 3 years, and then God doesn't want it anymore, so it reverts back to nothing, and it's only been here 3 years and now it's gone. If God's will to create this computer case vanishes, it won't just vanish the computer case will never have been. The computer case will never have been, because God's will was what was always creating it, and it's above time, right? So it's not that the thing will just vanish like a magic trick. The whole world will never have been here. Outside of time and before time, God's will, if it's gone, nothing ever happened, which is hard for us to understand. We're so bound in time. But God's will that brings things from nothing to something is actually creating all of it before time. And if that will retracts, now the world has never been here. Right. The fact that the light is still there means it doesn't revert, that it's still here continuously. I'm just talking about the opposite. This light.
This light comes from the blessed Ein Sof, except that it's clothed in many garments.
So this light that seems to be so well hidden that it's gone, it actually comes from the Ein Sof, which is infinite. It should be impossible to hide it. It's just clothed in many garments, and those garments are God's aspect of Gevura, which is also infinite. So it's only God's aspect of Gevura that can clothe those garments. And as we'll see, there's a specific garment that the Alter Rebbe is getting to that is able to actually receive, enclose, and both hide and contain and now manifest the Shechinah that's entering the world.
Are you saying that everything was created before the world existed?
Well, you say we're trying to have a conversation about outside time, but with words that are always related to time. Yeah, exactly. So when you say, am I saying the world was created before time existed?
Yeah,
Like before, not chronologically.
yeah.
So maybe above is a better word, right? Kadmon, like previous to, or what's the word in English? Primordial.
Because they make
So
us-
there's a primordial will that created time, and that precedes time, but not chronologically, because there's no time. So you can't say it's before, as in, a millisecond before in the Big Bang, right? I'm talking about something that's even before time.
Because they make the point about like Miriam's well was created. Well, that was the sixth day.
Yeah, no, that was already, time already existed, and then now we're talking about like creating physical stuff, and you got, the famous tongs. You know about the
Yeah,
tongs?
Yeah.
I love the tongs. There's a list of things, or it's just not even a sidebar here. There's a list of things that God created in the twilight. Was before Shabbat? When was it? It was
Before the first Shabbat is what
Yeah.
it says.
a list of things. I think the donkey that Abraham rode on.
The mouth of the
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 Bilam's
ground
mouth?
that opened for Korah.
Okay, so I don't know the whole list, but the one I will never forget, Bleed-Etter,
Those tongues.
is tongs, right? You got this whole list of very spiritual things that are being created, and then you got tongs. Why?
For birth.
Tongs. What?
Birth, birth.
Tongs?
For birth?
Yeah, it was for birth.
Tongs for birth?
Yeah.
What I read is
Arabia.
tongs because you can't create tongs unless you have tongs. Like you need tongs to make tongs. To reach into the fire to get tongs, you need tongs. So obviously you had to have tongs. You couldn't make tongs without tongs. So someone had to start it. God made tongs.
Moses' tongue. Was there hot tongues on his tongue?
No.
No, I think he with his hand is how the midrash. Anyways, so but that was all after time. What we're talking about here is if something stops existing in God's will, that is like if I'm a character in a movie, I might have a whole backline, right? Because we love when I start going this way, right? If I'm a character in a movie, not the actor, but the character itself, that character has a whole life, a whole backline. The movie starts, and now the movie has created the whole backline of that character, right? So in the movie, that's real time that exists for that character. If I never made the movie, it's not like that character still existed till the beginning of the movie, and then the movie didn't happen, so now they just stopped existing. If I never made a movie, that character never got the backline. Like the movie created the whole world and the whole character. So in the chronological time of that movie reality, when I decide not to make the movie, time doesn't stop, time never happened. See what I mean? Now go out to real time, and God is the creator, director, whatever you call it. God has decided to create something called time, so to create a world. If God decides, no, I don't want that world, I don't need time either, and the world never existed before time because I created the whole thing to create a world. And so the world never existed because it never even entered into time. So you have to try and imagine abstractly something that is above time, which we can't really because we're so time bound. But it's not before chronologically.
So when it says that the well stopped and the clouds stopped and the manna stopped.
That's just a miracle ceasing. That's not something, that's not God's will retracting, right? I mean, a person lives and a person dies, doesn't mean that they never lived, right? That soul's still there. Abstract. Where are we? Someone let me know.
The horizon.
As is written.
וכמו שכתוב בעץ חיים שאור וחיות כדור הארץ, החומרי הנראה לעיני בשר הוא ממלכות דמלכות עשייה. Go ahead, Linda.
As it is written in Eitz Chaim, that the light and vitality of the physical orb of earth, which is seen by mortal eyes, is derived from Malchut of Asiya.
So now we're going to see very quickly how the actual Or Ein Sof is still enclosed even in this physical world, because the sphere of the earth is derived from the lowest level of Kabbalah. If you look at, I've got kind of the sideways tree of life here as a nice design. So let me see. Oh, I'm mirrored in mine. I can't see which side's which. Right, whichever it is. So you got Malchut, which is one of the other of these. I can't read it in mirror writing here. That's the lowest level of all the Sfirot. And within that, it contains all the other ones, including Malchut of Malchut. So you have the lowest level within the lowest level of Asiya of the lowest world. So the very plunk bottom of spiritual and almost physical creation. And now the earth comes out of that. So you'd think there's so many screens we've been talking about. It's gone through the whole system of the Sfirot. Each one is creating a screen for the next world and the next world and the next world. Finally get to the lowest world and the lowest sphere of the lowest world. And can you really say there's Ein Sof in there? It's been blocked so many times. Maybe there isn't. Here's how it works. Uvetocha malchut yitzira v'chulu.
And in this contained Malchut of the next highest world, the world of Yetzirah, and so on.
Right, so I'm looking at Malchut of Asiya, the lowest aspect, within the lowest aspect, the lowest world, but within it is the lowest aspect of the next world up, Yetzirah, the world of formation. So already I've got a much higher light that's hidden within that garment, so to speak. Ad shebetoch kulan yutzirot datzilus. Up to you. No, please you. No, I insist. Go on, come on.
With the Malchut and Yetzirah in turn, there is contained Malchut of Bria and so on. So that in all of them, within the level of Malchut of all worlds, including the level of Malchut of Yetzirah, are contained the 10th world of the loftiest world, the world of Yetzirah. That's you. Which I'm united with the emanator of the best things.
Yeah. So in Malchut of Asiya is contained Malchut of Yetzirah. And then in all of them, if you keep going up, you actually have the 10 Sfirot of the world of Atzilut, because those shine into Malchut of Atzilus. And up in the top of the 10 Sfirot of Atzilus, you got Chochmah of Atzilus, and that is the place where the universe's identity is just nullification to the Ein Sof. That the whole identity of the entire cosmos is just, there's nothing here except Ein Sof, and that's where the light of the Ein Sof is able to actually shine in and unify with Chochmah of Atzilus. So the Ein Sof itself, through going into Chochmah of Atzilus, which shines down to Malchut of Atzilus, and then Malchut of Bria, and then Malchut of Yetzirah, and then finally Malchut of Asiya. And now Malchut of Asiya, there's nothing left there, but still within that almost basically no light, there is that infinite light still completely united with it, right? So by going through this very, very complex chain of shields and garments that is the Hishtalshalut, the sort of chain of how the worlds are created, the Ein Sof is still contained within everything that we see around us. It's just so blocked that it's not visible at all. I'm getting blank stares.
If it's not visible, how do we know it's still there?
Just because the Torah says so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
We're here.
you could say it because we're here. We're here. Like you're talking about what's the first premise, right? So none of this is provable. Someone might look and say, my first premise is if I can't see it, it's not there. And then I can't argue with them, right? But if your first premise is there are certain truths that are revealed, and as Jews, God came and gave something called the Torah to us, and that's what we have to rely on for our first premises, because we don't, for us, it's just a flip of a coin. Maybe the world is just physical, maybe it isn't. I don't know, right? So if my first premise is that experience was real and God is correct, then okay, if I'm here, that means that there is light, right?
So even the lowest world is just as strong as it is in the top.
Not just as strong in terms of its being manifest, but it is the thing that is giving life to everything. It's what is creating us something from nothing. So it is the life force of everything. So it's still an infinite light, no matter how many times it's been blocked and shielded. Yeah, it's still an infinite light that is the thing that's giving life and existence to everything.
It's like Russian dolls in reverse.
It's like the Russian dolls in reverse. Why in reverse? Because you're shielding them.
You're shielding it, but it's like God's power is infinite and magnificent and huge.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't be in that itty bitty little doll.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It would be, but it's like Russian dolls in reverse.
I think it's
Yeah.
more like like a large window versus a small window, like a pinhole. There's still light coming through. That light is still the same light as it is.
Yeah, we talked about that, about the contraction is like making it small. And also you have to add to that, like a lamp that has a veil on top of it, like a lamp that has a shade. So you might have an infinite kilowatt bulb that creates infinite light that would not just blind you, but actually eliminate you out of existence, because you would just merge with the energy of the light because it's infinite. Now, how are you going to relate to that? Okay, better take a firewall and put it around that so that it's blocked, but it's an infinite light. It's getting through the firewall. There's still infinite light that gets to the other side of the firewall. So now you put another big shade around it. And now maybe you can just barely survive for a second, but then you put another one. You keep putting shades around it. Eventually you get a light you can work with and deal with. You keep putting more, eventually it looks like there's no light at all. But there's something that gets through, even if it's not visible.
I also keep thinking about the story of Esther.
Because it's hidden.
Because it's all,
Yeah.
and God is never mentioned in the entire story, and yet clearly there's still an intervention.
Yeah. So the story of Esther, the story of Purim, is absolutely a model for this. It's a parable of this, that even though it looks like just a physical world, just politics, that God's hand is still in there but hidden. So they're united. We're all united. They are all united. That is, Malchut of Asiya is still united with the Ein Sof, with the emanator, through this system. And that is the end of chapter 51. So now, as I said, focus again on the big picture. We now understand how the soul is flowing into the body. The soul has a stage where it's essential, where it's just simple, pashut, no divisions, no definition, relates to the whole body equally, enlivening it, but hidden everywhere. And then B, you have a gilui, a revelation of the soul that does have components, that does have the power of sight, the power of speech, and that is revealed in this intermediary aspect, which is the brain. The brain first, and then flows to the rest of the body. And now we've looked at how the light that is entering the universe is shielded so that it can create a universe that it relates to, but we've yet to see what is that intermediary function in the universe. So the essence of God is just there alone, doesn't relate to anything, hidden everywhere equally. You can't say there's anywhere where God isn't. God's everywhere equally, but no matter how high up in the spiritual worlds, God's essence is still hidden just as much as here. But B, this manifestation, this gilui, does relate to the world, is there in the higher worlds more than the lower worlds. There are garments and garments that shield the lower worlds more and more. But what is that intermediary stage? Now we're going to go into. So chapter 52, page 806.
We don't have, she didn't send the thing for check.
Oh, probably in my office. Want to go check if Maya has it? Appreciate it. I'm sure whatever you missed, when I get back, I'll say it again a bunch of times. It's my style. Thanks. וכמו שבנשמת האדם עיקר גילוי כללות החיות הוא במוחין וכל האיברים מקבלים אור וכוח לבד המאיר להם ממקור גילוי החיות שבמוחין. And just, oh, you want to pass this book around? Can we do that?
Oh, this is actually Maya's book.
Oh, yeah.
She wasn't at her desk.
Well, why don't you read it, Inga?
Yeah, let's start and then we'll
Okay.
pass around.
Okay.
Just as
And just as in the human soul, the principal manifestation of the undiffused vitality is in the brain, while all the organs receive merely a light and potency which radiates to them from the source of the manifestation of the said vitality in the brain.
that's some chunky language, right? So just as in the human soul, the first place this package of energy comes is in the brain. It's not diffused yet. It's the whole light all at once. Then it diffuses to each part of the body with the power of hearing, the power of motion, whatever. So indeed, chacha mamash al derech mashal ikar gilui klalut hamshachat hachayut hachayot haolamot v'habrim shebahem umulubash v'nichlal b'ritzono v'chokhmato uvinato v'dato yitbarech hanikroin b'shem mochin.
So indeed, figuratively speaking, is the essential manifestation of the general stream of vitality animating the worlds and the creatures therein, clothed and contained in his blessed will, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which are called the intelligence.
Right. So it's the seichel, or the mochin of the Ein Sof, of God. What is God's brain, so to speak, as far as we're concerned? And what do you call this? This is a warning. You can't say that the essence of God has intelligence or there's anything called intelligence, because God's completely simple and divisible, right? So this big argument, can you say, God is Chokhmah? You can't, right? How can Chokhmah be united with God when God has no parts? But once you get to Atzilus, and once the light that is this simple infinite light enters into the vessels of Atzilus, there you can say, in terms of the world of Atzilus, which is united with God, God does have this thing called intellect. And what is that? That is the Chabad of Atzilus, so Chokhmah, Bin, and Dat. So that is God's capacity to have inspirational energy, God's capacity to cognitively, so to speak, enlarge that. And this is in terms of creation of the cosmos. And then God's capacity for that to relate to God's midos, so that it actually moves towards becoming creation. God might have love or awe, and then with that chesed, with that love, God's going to create the world. And with that gevura, God's going to separate the world into components, right? Water and sky and earth. So we do say that in terms of the world of Atzilus, God does have something called mochin, called a brain, and something called seichel, intelligence. And what is that? V'henen ha-melubashim b'Torah u'mitzvoteha.
And these will, Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat are clothed in the Torah and its mitzvot.
Here we go. Right. So when we say the Torah is united with God, what does that mean? That means that the Torah is God's Chokhmah. It's not just that God took God's Chokhmah and said, you know what, I'm going to express something really, really wise. I'm going to write a Torah for people, and then I'm going to hand it to them as a separate book. That's like it's a record of my wisdom. Like if I wrote a dictionary, that's a record of my wisdom of the English language, right? But it's not me. But the Torah is not a record of God's wisdom. The Torah is God in book form. The Torah is God in book form. And when the Zohar says the Torah and God are completely united, that's what it means. The Torah is not something that's external and separate that comes down and we can say, oh, here it is. It's not God anymore. It's actually still God in book form. Doesn't mean you worship it. Doesn't mean you bow down to it, right? You only bow down to God. But the Torah is one with God in that sense. And so that means it's completely one with God's Chokhmah. It is God's Chokhmah. And even higher, what are the mitzvahs? When God says, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, that's God's Ratzon. That's even higher than the Chokhmah. That's Ratzon, which is the outer level of Keter. So the very, very top of the Sfirot. So that is the intermediary, that is the cosmic brain, so to speak, where this light of the Shechinah, this light that is emanating from God's essence, is actually able to first enter into the world. And then from there, just like in our brain, it's able to now radiate to all the other worlds, giving them the light that relates to them. It's a key piece. And it's not just key for understanding Kabbalah, it's key for understanding how to relate to the Torah. Because the most miraculous thing about the Torah is not that there's codes contained in it, not that it can predict things, not that it tells of miracles, not that it get whatever it is. It's that the light of the Ein Sof is completely united with it. And they're one and the same, right? So it really is God's Chokhmah and God's Ratzon right here in front of us. And because it is that, it's able to be the garment that the Shechinah can enclose itself in, because it comes from a much higher place than Malchus of Atzilus. It comes from Chokhmah and Keter of Atzilus. So something that is so much loftier, something that precedes Malchus of Atzilus by so far, can now come down, and as the Torah, it can be a garment that receives the Shechinah when anything else in the cosmos would be nullified by the light of the Shechinah. Make sense? So that's the three parts. In me, it's my soul's essence coming down with a package that's manifest, and it's manifest in the intermediary of the brain to go to the body. In the cosmos, it's the Shechinah this infinite light that's intended for creation that can't relate to creation yet, that's going to come down. Sorry, in the in the cosmos, it's God's essence, which is completely simple and indivisible, creating now a light that can relate to the world, but it needs something like a brain to come down and relate to the whole world. And for that, we need the Torah, which, because it comes from such a high place, is able to now receive the Shechinah, and from there it shines to the rest of the world like a brain flows to a body. Thank you. They weren't made?
Is the Torah a garment?
In this case, the Torah is a garment for God's both. The Torah is a garment for God's Chochmah and Ratzon. And in this case, in terms of Atzilus, it becomes a garment for the Shechinah.
My book's over there.
There you go. Does anybody want to sum up for Rick? What's the punchline that we learned?
Torah and mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs are from the Keter and Chochmah of Ein Sof.
So they correspond to what in our metaphor? They do what? They correspond to what? If the metaphor is my soul shines with a revelation to my brain that then goes to my body, Torah mitzvahs is what in the cosmic metaphor?
It's the physical manifestation of God that we can relate to.
It's the brain.
It's the brain.
It's the brain. Yeah.
It flows to the rest.
Yeah. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that the cosmos needs something that the Shechinah, this package of manifest energy that can relate to the universe, but it would nullify the universe because it's infinite. It needs something like the brain that my soul's flowing into to then radiate to the rest of the body / the universe. And what is that? It's the Chabad of Atzilus, Chochmah Bina Dat of Atzilus, which is Torah mitzvahs, because they come from God's intellect. So that the Chabad of Atzilus, that functions as the brain of the cosmos, which is receiving this light, right? And as it is as Torah, it's receiving the Shechinah itself, which now it can radiate to the rest of the world.
Torah and mitzvah?
Yeah, because Torah is God's Chochmah and mitzvahs is God's Ratzon. So both together. V'gilu klalut hamshacha zo hu mekor hachayut asher ha'olamot mekablim kol echad bifratot rak ha'ara mitpashetet mira mimakor zeh. Who's reading now? Yeah, go ahead. It is the source, the manifestation,
Manifestation.
top of 808.
808.
The manifestation of this general flow of life, which is similar to the undiffused stream of vitality found in the brain, takes place, as the Alter Rabbi will soon say, when the flow from intelligence descends into the sphere of Malchut, this manifestation.
Is the source?
Go ahead.
Oh, is the source of vitality which the world receives. Each one in particular receiving but a different diffused glow that shines forth from the source.
All right, so you have this Gilui, this package, which we're calling the Shechinah. That's Malchus of Atzilus, and we'll learn a few more names as we go on, maybe today. That has to have a intermediary transfer station of some kind, like our brain in the body. That is Torah mitzvahs, which comes from Chabad, so it's able to. And from there, from the Torah, now it's diffused to the rest of creation. If not, if we didn't have Torah mitzvahs revealed and available to receive that, then how could the world ever exist? Because the Shechinah would just nullify it.
That's what they call the Torah, the blueprint
Of creation. Yeah, exactly. You skipped about 3 steps ahead, but that's exactly it. And it flips a whole understanding of the Torah, because you might think, I live in a physical world that has physical laws and physical rules and physical realities, and that's one thing. But you know what? I'm a Jew, and so I keep Shabbat, and I eat certain things and don't eat certain things, and I give tzedakah, and I'm kind. And maybe those 2 things contradict, right? And we'll get to this more later. But maybe if I'm going to be successful in the world, I need to work on Shabbat, and I want to eat whatever I want to eat, so I'm strong and I'm healthy, and maybe I don't want to be nice to people and kind, because if I cheat them, I'll do better in the world. But you know what? I'm a holy person. I'm going to follow the Torah with its own rules. And so I'm going to give up some of the world. I'm going to function less well in the world because I want to be a holy person. So I'm going to keep Shabbat so I'll have less income. And I'm going to not eat certain things. So maybe as a civilization, I'll be less secure because if I can't eat certain things, it's not good, right? I'll be less healthy. And goodness. And maybe third thing was, oh yeah, I'll be nice to people. When in business, I should be a cutthroat. I'll make more money than cutthroat. But as a Jew, I have to be fair and nice, so I'll have less money. But you know what? To be holy, you follow the Torah's rules instead of the world's rules. A lot of people look at it like that. And that's, I mean, it's reasonable. They think the Torah is holy. It's from God and the world is something else. So that's what a Jew should do. But here we're saying, no. The world itself is only from, all the energy that comes to the world is from the Torah. The light of Shechinah is shining into the Torah. From there, it's being diffused to the worlds, and the world's reality comes from the Torah. So the Torah is like a blueprint for a building or like code for a computer program, and nothing happening here in the world can function other than by the energy and the flow and the logic of the Torah. So in fact, if you want to do well in the world, you have to be following the codes in the Torah and the reality in the Torah, because that is the best way to relate to the world. The world is coming from that. The world is generated from that. And it's not that, oh, well, if I work on Shabbat, I'll earn more money. In fact, when I take Shabbat off, somehow the world is going to work better for me and I'll do even better. We can get to it. Lots of stories of a tzaddik telling somebody not to work on Shabbat and they do even better financially. You can believe it or not, but if you experiment with it, you find that there's something else going on where the laws of the world are not something separate and different from the kabbalistic energy coming from the Torah. And reform caveat, I'm not saying that means you got to follow every law of the Torah. I know there's ones that we in the reform movement have distanced ourselves from, so we're not having that conversation. And I'm not contradicting that when I say that, but kabbalistically and energetically, still relating to the Torah as the source of the light of the world with what we do here at Temple Israel, that has tremendous, tremendous power. I know that's not an entirely logical statement. I know there's a paradox there, but we're talking about the world relating to the Ein Sof, so the whole thing is a paradox. There's no way you can frame it without some kind of paradox. So that's just my reform bracket there. Yeah, nobody follows everything. Nobody.
So there's only half of it, so mitzvot that are followed.
Yeah, whatever it is, and nobody can follow the entire emotional side of the mitzvot. Nobody can love everyone exactly like themselves. I don't care how big a tzaddik you are. At some point, at some level, maybe except the Rebbe and that kind of it. At some point, you on your level didn't love somebody to the extent that you should have as a tzaddik, right? So, or at some point you wasted 15 seconds that wasn't for the point of learning Torah. So even if you're at the very highest level, you still at your level, there's something you're missing. And so we're all in the same boat. So that, this is a class on how to use Hasidus and Kabbalah within the Reform movement. It's not a class on it's not a class discussing the entire philosophy of the Reform movement. That we are what we are. And now we're introducing this practice within that. I know I forgot entirely where I am. Ki dimion or hamit pashet me hashemesh al derech mashal mechuchot evrei haguf me hamoach haniskar le'el.
In a similar manner to the light that radiates from the sun, by way of example, where the rays are but a diffused glimmer of the sun's essence, or as the faculties of the organs of the body derive from the brain, as discussed above in the previous chapter.
So just like we can understand, oh yeah, my brain is aware of what my hand is doing and my foot. My brain is getting information from my ear, but my ear does not understand all the processes happening in my brain, right? The light is coming into my brain and then diffusing to the body and then is aware of what's happening in the body. That's the same thing as what's happening in the Shechinah coming into the Torah and mitzvahs, and then that diffusing into the world. That light first comes entirely into Torah and mitzvahs. It's completely united with it. It completely fits and matches it, and it's all contained in it for every world. And from there, just like a sun might be shining into the room of my brain and then diffusing into the rest of the body, the Shechinah is the sun that's coming into the Torah and then diffusing to the rest of the worlds. Umakor zeh hu anikra alma diskalia. Now we're going to get into, go ahead. Is this?
It is this source, the source being a revelation from the general stream of vitality found within intelligence, which is called in the Kabbalah the world of manifestation, because as the Alter Rebbe will soon say, it is here that godliness first becomes manifest in the worlds.
Right, so we have lots of names of God, lots of names we're aware of. It doesn't mean that there's different gods, God forbid, right? It just means God does certain behaviors. And so each of those names is connecting to a certain behavior of God, right? So when I'm here at Temple Israel leading a service, you might call me Cantor Smolash. It relates to the behavior I'm doing. When I'm with my kids, they might call me dad. It relates to the behavior of raising kids, right? If a police officer pulls me over, they'll say, sir, can you blah, blah, blah. And that's because I've been speeding or something, which I shouldn't do. I'm not saying I do, but, right? So different names that you have relate to what, don't admit anything, right? So names relate to different behaviors. It's natural. And we do the same thing with God. So we're going to have 6 names we're going to be introduced to here. The first 4 here in this section relate to how the Shechinah gives light and life to creation. How the Shechinah, how this package of energy gives life and light to creation. So the first name is Alma Diskalia. Alma Diskalia is Aramaic for a revealed world. So in Atzilus, you've got everything above Malchus, right? And certainly Chochmah that we've talked about, all that is hidden. It's united with God, and we call that the hidden world, Alma Diskasia. But this Alma Diskalia, once it hits Malchus, and now the Shechinah is ready to shine into the world and relate to the world, that's what God wants to reveal. That's the energy God plans to share with us. Just like us, when I'm about to say something, I've thought it through, I have feelings, now I'm about to say it, that's revealed. From my words, you see what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, it becomes revealed. Same thing with this. So Alma Diskalia, that is the revealed world, that's name number 1. Matronita, it's also called Matronita, which means the queen. So we'll get into that. The queen is a second name, and it talks about how it allows the king, so to speak, of all this Malchut, this rulership of the world, how it allows it to actually relate to the world, because Malchut is still above the world. The Imatata, and then there's a third one, lower mother. And here again, we'll go into next class a little more in detail. But in Kabbalah, there's a higher mother and a lower mother. The higher father and mother are Chochmah and Bina, because your intellect is what gives birth to your emotions. And specifically Bina, when you cogitate on something, when you think about it a lot, when you really go into it, that creates emotions. It gives birth to emotions, impregnated by the father, but birthed by the mother. So that's the higher mother that gives birth to emotions. But the lower mother, Malchus, that gives birth to worlds. So again, it relates to how God is behaving in terms of sharing light with the world. And finally, Shechinah milshon v'shechanta b'tocham, and it's called Shechinah from the phrase "I'll dwell among them." Shochen means to dwell. So everything above the Shechinah, right? Netzach and Hod of Atzilus, they're not here. They don't relate to the world. It's completely hidden. But the Shechinah, that energy that's meant to be shared with the world to create the world, even down here in the physical world, this pencil has some hidden spark from the Shechinah that's dwelling in it, that's contained in it, that relates to it. We can't see it because it's so hidden. But in the higher world, certainly you can, the angels are well aware that there's divine light that's dwelling within them, that's creating them. And that's why they're so excited by any connection to godliness. So 4 terms again: Alma Diskalia, that's the revealed world; Matronita, that's the queen; Imatata, that's the lower mother; and Shechinah is the dwelling. Make sense? So, and you see each one, we'll go through, the Alter Rebbe goes through in detail each one to show what the behavior is of how the Shechinah is giving light and energy to creation. A lot of names. Al Shem Shemakor Ze Hu Reshit Hitgalut Or Ein Sof. I think Dan,
Let's see.
the above
We're
mentioned.
still swimming.
Are we at the top of?
Top of 8 cat.
Thank you. The above mentioned source is called the world of manifestation. This source is the beginning of the revelation of the light of the Ein Sof. And since the source itself constitutes a revelation, it is itself known as the world of manifestation because of its own nature and not because it vitalizes the revealed world.
Okay, let me just quickly go through a little more detail about the names, because I see some glassing over. And then next class, we'll go through the Alter Rebbe doing it, and we'll do a quick meditation to finish. So basically, like I said, Alma Diskalia, that's the revealed world. And that's how this light now becomes not hidden.
Is also called
Where's that? Matronita?
yeah.
They're all the same thing. So this is all, if you know the Kabbalah that we've learned, Malchus of Atzilus, so the lowest sphere of Atzilus, that is where God finally, so to speak, talks and creates a world. God's speech creates the world, like the 10 commandments, the 10 statements God made to create the world. That's also this Malchut of Atzilus. So all these are various names of Malchut of Atzilus. We have many, many, many names because we have many distinct ways that we recognize God is behaving within that important act of speaking to create the world. So just like the Inuit have many names for snow because it's vital to their culture, in Kabbalah, it's vital to us how God is behaving when God creates the world in specific. So we have many, many names for Malchut of Atzilus, but it's all the same thing. But it's different ways of pinning the behavior that's happening in that same thing. So Alma Diskalia, that's the behavior of God now revealing that package, right? It's no longer hidden, now it's revealed. So it's a revealed world compared to a hidden world. That is written.
The top of 809.
No, bottom of 808. The last two words of 808 are Alma Diskalia.
808.
Yeah. Yeah, so it depends how you say it. The people that generally say these words pronounce them that way. So I gravitate that way, but we would pronounce it Alma Ditgalia or Alma Ditgalia, right? So that is, oh, you're being thrown by my Taf as an S.
Right.
Never mind. So that Alma Diskalia, that is the behavior of revealing what was hidden, right? But that's the way Malchus Atzilus is the revelation of something that was hidden. That's that behavior.
So this is all, Atzilus is the top one, and so this is the bottom part of the top one.
Yeah, the bottom sphere of the top world of Atzilus, right? Then Matronita, that's Malchut of Atzilus is also called the queen. Why? Because, and here we're going to be very gender traditional here. A king is supposed to be above a world. Like Saul was head and shoulders above everyone else. That wasn't just physical height, that was also spiritual greatness. And a king really doesn't relate to the nation directly. A king is transcendent to the nation, but a king wants to relate to the nation. And what allows that? That is the queen. The queen is the bridge that allows the king to now lower itself and connect to the nation. The same thing here, Malchut of Atzilus, it's bringing light down from something completely transcendent, but it's allowing it to relate to the world. And so it functions in the same way as a queen that's allowing the king, which is everything above that, to relate to the world. Then Ve'ima Tata'a, we talked about that. There's a behavior of giving birth to the world. So not just making something revealed to the world, that's the revealed world, not just allowing myself to relate to the world like a queen would with a king, but now actually giving birth to the worlds. That's a different behavior that Malchut of Atzilus is engaged in. And that is where, like Bina gives birth to the emotions, Malchut gives birth to the cosmos, to all the worlds. So hence the name Ima Tata, the lower mother. And finally, the Shechinah that we're very familiar with, that is also a name for Malchut of Atzilus. They're all names for that same phenomenon. But here it's not just that it's A, revealed, or B, can relate, or C, gives birth to, but D, it actually dwells in. So the way that energy is dwelling in any of the lower worlds, that is the behavior we're calling the name of the Shechinah, but they're all Malchut of Atzilus. This is all the same phenomenon, right? But when we use these different names, we're relating to the different behaviors that are happening where God is doing that behavior through Malchut of Atzilus. A little better?
So different functions.
Different functions. Yeah. All right, let's finish with a little meditation. And thanks if you've been joining us on Facebook, or if you've been watching in the future, you're welcome to meditate. And of course, although we're just going to take a few minutes, you can take longer if you want to. Once we go into some silence, you can pause your device and sit in the meditation for 15, 20 minutes is very helpful. And just let yourself calm down. Your whole system just come to a very restful pause. Let's scan our body from top to toes. So nice, smooth, relaxed scalp and ears, lips loose and relaxed, eyelids smooth. Just feel the tongue in your mouth resting, and your throat open and easy. Shoulders nice and heavy, while your spine is nice and long and open. And feel that weight coming down through your hips. Just need the minimum of muscular engagement there. Your thighs falling, weight through the knees and the ankles, and toes open and relaxed on the floor. Allow the breath to also flow smoothly through your torso. Nice and deep in and out. You can breathe through your nostrils. We'll do 4 counts to breathe in, 4 counts to hold the breath, 4 counts to breathe out, 4 counts to remain empty. Starting with me, breathing in, 2, 3, 4, staying full, 2, 3, 4, releasing out, 2, 3, 4, remaining empty, 2, 3, breathing back in, 1, 2, 3, 4, staying full, 2, 3, 4, back out, 2, 3, 4, and empty, 2. Keep that pattern going on your own. Just this breathing exercise is already creating wonderful benefits physically and psychologically, measurable in studies. Now we're going to add a spiritual component. We'll open up a wisdom gateway. That will be the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. That open, empty space, so to speak, that is our wisdom gateway, and allow it to open as you continue breathing in this even pattern. If you'd like, you could take a few minutes if you're meditating on your own to clarify that wisdom gateway, sharpen how it appears in your mind. Now let's place this divine concept in the wisdom gateway. Torah and God are completely one. And the Torah and God are completely one. The most miraculous thing about the Torah is that it's completely united with this infinite light of God. Let that divine concept fill your wisdom gateway. rather than keeping your mind empty, as some forms of meditation from the East, we want to fill our mind with any detail of this divine concept. Torah and God are one. What does that mean? What are the ramifications? What does it look like? What does it sound like? How do I relate to that? The light of God is flowing perfectly into the Torah and then radiating to the rest of the world. Let that fill our minds to the brim for just a few moments. With us in class, feel free to wiggle your fingers and toes, open your eyes. Thanks for that learning and a quick meditation. It's been a pleasure to have you here in User's Guide for the Soul. As I always say, please email Maya at temple-israel.org if you'd like to join us on Zoom or otherwise, and have a wonderful week.